Hello and welcome everyone. In our last few videos, we were looking everything about the London system, like how you can make the setup of the London system. Then we were looking at some traps in the London system. But in today's video, you are going to play as black. So how you are going to beat the London system if your opponent plays that? Correct? A general setup for London system is to play their pawn to d4, then they get their bishop out on the f4 square, right? Let's just see a move. Then they get their bishop out on the f4 square. Then pawn comes to c3, e3, bishop here. This is a normal setup, right? This is what the opponent wants to play. Here, let's see, after he makes his intention clear, after he plays his bishop to f4, what best you can do there? You can go with a strange looking move. You first play a pawn to c5. Now, what's the idea behind c5 is your flank pawn is trying to give an attack to his central pawn. If it defends here with the classical move by playing his pawn to c3, then you have an interesting line. You just play your queen to b6. Now, this queen on the b6 square aims at d4, and you kind of want to say your opponent that you have prematurely moved your bishop out, because now you are giving an attack to his b2 pawn, right? Here, there are various ways of how he can defend it. Let's say he defends it with queen to c2. He can also go with the queen to b3 or any other move where he can just push the pawn up. We are going to have a look at everything in this line. So let's say he starts with queen to c2 first. He places his queen on the c2 square. Then we exchange on the c4 square. If he captures here back, you definitely cannot recapture, because then it will be a checkmate for you. But instead, what you can do is, when he captures over here, then you can go with your knight to c6 first. So the idea behind knight c6 is attacking this, and now you can go and capture because the bishop will be defended by the rook. Here, if your opponent defends the pawn on the d4 square by pushing his pawn to e3, then you play a pawn to d6, making your intentions more clear that you want to now give an attack in the center. Play the pawn to e5. If he defends it by playing his knight to f3, thinking that I have covered the e5 square, there are three attackers, the knight, the bishop and the pawn, and there are only two defenders. So even if black plays the pawn to e5, white is going to win it. But we are going to say not this time. Let's just go ahead with the pawn to e5. Even if he captures, because his bishop and pawn is in danger, he would want to capture it. Let's say he captures your pawn on the e5 square. Now you capture it back with your pawn attacking this bishop. Let's have a look at both the things. What a beginner player would do, what an advanced level player would do, who already knows a lot of chess would be in the advanced level. So if a beginner player plays this, he might capture the pawn on e5 square with his knight. If your opponent is a beginner player, he would capture on the e5 square with his knight. If he does that, then you just play your queen to a5 and give a check. If he blocks it with the knight, then you're just going to win this knight over here. You're going to win a piece over here. And if he tries to defend this check by playing his queen to c3 square, trying to trade the queens off, and then this piece is not in danger, then what you can do there instead is not to exchange the queens, but go with your bishop to b4, pin the queen and win the game. Correct? Alright, let's have a look. What if your opponent is not a beginner player? He's not capturing on the e5 square. Instead, he's an advanced level player, and he is just pinning your knight on the knight f6 by playing his bishop to g5. If he does that, then you sacrifice the bishop. You play a bishop to f5, attacking the queen. If the queen captures this bishop, then you are just going to win this rook, right? So you cannot do that. Alright, this was all when the opponent was playing his queen on the c2 square. Now let's say after all these variations, playing the pawn to c5, c3, queen b6, your opponent is not going for queen c2. Instead, this time he is playing his queen to b3. Then also you were attacking the d4 pawn, you can just win a pawn there, right? And the bishop is in danger. But instead here, if he doesn't capture after queen to b3, if he doesn't capture it and he first exchanges the queen, he is not capturing the pawn on the d4 square. He is just capturing a queen on the b6 square. Then you recapture. Now, if he recaptures your pawn on the d4 square with his pawn, then that's a blunder, because now you can go with your knight to c6, attack the pawn on d4. If he defends it by playing his pawn to e3, then you have this fantastic knight b4 move, aiming at c2, aiming at the a2 square. Also, when you exchange the queens, the rook file is open. So this is in danger. If he defends the c2 square by playing his king to d1, then you can capture on a2. If he ignores a threat, you have an amazing threat here. And if he ignores that threat, plays his knight to f3, then you can go with the knight to c3, a fantastic discovered check and an attack on the rook. Alright, let's have a look. What if your opponent is not a beginner player? Alright, he captures the queen on the b6 square. You capture it back, and now instead of capturing on d4, he is first capturing the knight on the b8 square, so that the knight doesn't go to c6 and b4, cannot jump. So when he captures your knight on the b8 square, you first capture d takes on c3, aiming to capture over here, and then this will be a queen. Now your opponent would think, okay, he has given me a free piece. He's not capturing my bishop. He can anytime go back with the bishop on the e5 square and stop the promotion. But you still have an amazing move there. What's that? Capture the pawn on e2 with your rook. Sacrifice your rook. If the opponent captures the rook, then you push your pawn to c2. There's no way that he can stop the promotion of this pawn. If the king comes on the d2 square, then you just capture the knight and you make a queen. And if he moves the knight away, then you can go on c1, make a queen, and it will be a checkmate. So all in all, it is a fantastic variation, right? There are few more moves what the opponent can do. After pawn d4, knight f6, bishop f4, pawn c5. Let's say he's not playing his pawn to c3. Instead, he is simply going with his pawn to d5. Then you can now play your queen to b6. Our idea is simple. We are saying him that you have prematurely moved your bishop, and that's when we want to attack on your weakness. We are attacking on the b2 square. Here, if he defends this threat by playing his queen to c1, then it's a complete loss, because you can just capture on the d5 square. You win a complete pawn. And if he defends it by playing his pawn to b3 square, then you go queen b4 check. If the queen blocks it, then you exchange the queens and you win the pawn. Or you don't need to exchange the queens, you can simply win the pawn over here too. If he captures the queen, you can capture it back with the knight on b4. Here, if he blocks it with the bishop on the d2 square, then you first go with your queen to d4, attack the rook. He blocks this, you are attacking the pawn as well on the d5 square. So you capture after the exchange, you are still a pawn up in that position, right? So this is a fantastic line where you see you have to play on knight to f6. As soon as your opponent plays his bishop to f4, you know that his intention, he wants to go for the London system. So immediately play a pawn to c5 and then queen b6. This is our common standard line here, how we are going to beat the London system using this line. If you guys find this video interesting and helpful in your games, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel and share with your chess friends. I'll see you again in the next video. Till the time, bye bye, take care.